Hello, and welcome to this YouTube channel, Historical History. This channel, we're going to be talking about lots of interesting topics in history. Topics that just do not get talked about, and that most people have never even heard about. We're going to talk about the interesting stuff in history, the underrated parts that get buried under the depths of history. So let's get started. Have you ever wanted to be a millionaire? Because in the Netherlands, in the 1600s, you could have been if you had just one tulip. Just one. You could have bought a house, a mansion, gardens, lots of land with just one single tulip. Now, you may be wondering, how is this possible? And I will tell you. And it all starts way back in the early days, over 400 years ago, on a ship. Because in that time, a Dutch ship landed on the shores of Turkey, and the Ottoman Empire traded with them tulips. Now in the Netherlands, there were no tulips back then. So when Turkey gave the Dutch tulips, and they brought it back to the Netherlands, this was completely new for all the citizens of the Netherlands. And the tulips became very popular from the moment that they were brought in the late 1500s. The wealthy loved them, and the wealthy bought lots of them, and they showed it off in their gardens and on their front porches. And they showed off how beautiful the tulips were. And the tulips really were a prized commodity. Soon, people figured out how to grow tulips, but they were very hard to grow. And it took 7 to 12 years to grow a full tulip from seed all the way to a full-grown tulip. And tulips started spreading throughout the Netherlands, and they became more popular throughout the early 1600s. And soon, the middle class wanted tulips too, because they were still expensive. Not $1 million worth, but they were still pretty expensive. The middle class, they saw the tulips on the gardens of the wealthy, and they wanted them too. People admired the wealthy for their tulips, because there were no iPhones, there were no fancy cars, there were no Rolexes. All they had were the tulips. And that's what got people interested. And the price of tulips began to rise, slowly but surely, throughout the early 1600s, up until 1636. Now in 1636, something changed. The price of tulips began to increase dramatically, and the price changed almost every single day, up and up and up and up. And that's because what people started doing is they bought tulips and then sold them at a later date for a profit. They wanted to make money, and they were treating tulips like a stock. Now these people were known as stock jobbers. They're the equivalent of speculators today, and people just kept buying the tulips. And since people kept buying, it justified the higher price. So the price just kept going up and up and up, and people kept paying for it because they loved tulips so much. But it wasn't for the reason you think. At this point, people weren't just using tulips as a sign of status, or just so then they could grow nice in gardens. People aren't going to be paying thousands and thousands of dollars for just a single tulip just because they thought it looks good. What they really want was to make a profit. If you could buy a tulip and then sell it at a later date, you could make lots of money. So instead of just the stock jobbers doing it, soon it was a lot of the Dutch society. It was the bakers, and the shopkeepers, and the skilled craftsmen, and the fishermen, and the merchants. And many people in the Netherlands were caught up in all of this. And all of them just kept buying, and they bought at a higher price, and sold, and bought. And lots of people wanted to buy. It was in such high demand. Most tulips would only cost a few $1,000s in today's money. Other tulips were sold at an even higher price. But the tulip that sold for the most was the broken bulb tulip. And this tulip was like a rainbow. It had multiple different colors, it was insanely beautiful, and this one was worth a lot more than just a regular tulip. In fact, there are reports from that day that tulip at one point was sold for over $1 million in today's money. For just a single tulip. So if you wanted to be a millionaire during that time, all you needed was to hold one of those tulips in your hand and own it. But that only lasted for a certain period of time, very short period of time, and then something changed. In February of 1637, a few stock jobbers went over in a Dutch city, and they wanted to sell their tulips. And they went into the square, and they wanted to auction the tulips and make lots of money. But this time it was different, because they couldn't sell them. Nobody was willing to pay thousands of dollars for a tulip. People realized that that was crazy. Also at this time, the Netherlands was going through a bit of a plague, the bubonic plague to be exact. So people were kind of scared. The people could not sell the tulips. And this was happening in many cities across the Netherlands. And the price began to drop, first slowly and then dramatically. And over the course of 3 months, the price of tulip kept falling and falling and falling and falling until finally the price reached where it was back in the beginning, back in the early 1600s. And Tulip Mania was over. And lots of people lost a lot of money because of this. Because what a lot of people did was they didn't use just their own money. Instead, what they did was they borrowed money to be able to buy tulips. And what happened then was that the people were in debt. They didn't just lose all their savings, they lost all their savings, plus they lost even more. So they were now in lots of debt, people lost everything, and many people were stuck with leftover tulips that were now not worth that much. A tulip was the price of what a tulip should be. Now this is known in economic terms as a bubble, and it's when a stock or commodity usually rises in value, but just because people are buying and selling, and not because the value actually went up, just because people's intrinsic value of the item went up. What eventually happens is that they run out of buyers to buy the product, and because of that, due to supply and demand principles, the price will drop, just like with tulips. And it just goes in a downward spiral until it all falls down and it goes back to where the price was in the beginning. The bubble cannot last forever. And for tulips, the bubble popped. However, some people say that Tulip Mania never actually happened. One historian thinks that Tulip Mania was merely an exaggeration, and they base it off of this book in 1841 by George Mackay. In the book, George Mackay basically goes on commentary of what the Dutch say it was, and it wasn't really based on fact. So over the course of 200 years, there could have been a lot of exaggeration, and Tulip Mania could have just been this really small event. But we don't know. And we will never know, because Tulip Mania was such a long time ago. The most important lesson to be learned from this is to not buy investments just because everybody else is buying it, or because it's seen as cool. For example, Bitcoin. Lots of people are buying Bitcoin, and the price of Bitcoin is very fluctuating. So it goes up and then it goes down by huge margins, and lots of people don't really know what Bitcoin is. Lots of people are thinking, is it a currency? Is it an investment? Is it the future of the world? And we really don't know. And many people are thinking that Bitcoin is just the next Tulip Mania. But we'll never know what truly happens with Bitcoin, or if it actually will turn out to be the next Tulip Mania, where there's this big, huge crash and we'll go down to a price of 0. But we'll have to see. If there is one lesson to be learned from Tulip Mania, it is this: don't buy tulips for the money. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that you loved it. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video, and comment down below what other videos I should make and what other historical topics should be presented. I plan to be posting about once or twice a week, so stay tuned for more videos. See you next time.